She said it was just a small favor, until I realized it was slowly becoming permanent. At first, it didn't feel like a problem. That's how these things usually begin, not with something dramatic or obvious, but with something small enough to ignore. Something that asks for your patience before it asks for your space. It started with a chair. Every Sunday afternoon, I sit on my front porch with a cup of tea. Same chair, same corner. Same quiet view of the street I've lived on for over 20 years. It's not a fancy ritual, but it's mine. And at this point in life, you begin to understand the value of small, consistent comforts. That day, I noticed her sitting there. She was new to the neighborhood. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Energetic. Friendly in that slightly overconfident way some people have when they're trying to establish themselves quickly. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she said when she saw me. "I just needed a place to sit for a minute." "A minute. It's always a minute." I smiled politely. Of course I did. That's what we're taught to do. Especially as women. Especially as we get older. We're expected to be accommodating. Flexible. Understanding. "Oh, that's fine," I said. "I usually sit there in the afternoons, though." She nodded quickly. "Of course. Just today. Just today." If you've ever heard those words and felt something in your chest tighten just a little, comment 1. You already know where this is going. The next Sunday, she was there again. Same chair, same relaxed posture, this time with a book in her hand, like she had always belonged there. I stood at the door a moment longer than necessary, not because I was confused, but because I was deciding. You see, there's a moment in situations like this where you can still set the tone. Before the pattern settles in. Before the behavior becomes routine. And most people miss that moment. I walked outside slowly. "Oh, hi," she said, cheerful as ever. The light. It's interesting how people justify things. They rarely say, "I'm taking this because I can." Instead, they wrap it in something pleasant, something reasonable. I nodded. "I understand, but this is actually my spot." A pause. Not long. Just enough. "Oh, right," she said. "I'll just be another minute." There it was again. Another minute. Time stretches differently when it's not yours being taken. I didn't argue. Not yet. I went back inside. But I paid attention. Because patterns don't announce themselves loudly. They repeat quietly until you either accept them or interrupt them. By the third week, she didn't even look surprised to see me. She smiled, lifted her cup of coffee slightly and said, "Good afternoon," like we were sharing something. We weren't. And that's when I realized something important. It wasn't about the chair. It was about permission. Unspoken. Assumed. Expanding. There's a kind of person who interprets silence as agreement, who sees politeness as flexibility, who slowly steps further into your space not because they're malicious, but because no one has stopped them clearly. And clarity, I've learned, is something many people are uncomfortable with. That afternoon, I didn't hesitate. "I need my chair," I said. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. She blinked, surprised not by the words, but by the tone. Calm, direct, and not open for interpretation. "Oh, I know," I said gently. "But this is part of my routine. I'd like to keep it that way." There's a shift that happens in moments like this. You can almost see it, the recalculation behind the eyes. The quiet realization that the story they've been telling themselves might not hold up anymore. She stood up slowly. "Well, you could have said something sooner," she said. I nodded. "I just did." Silence. Not uncomfortable for me, but very uncomfortable for her. If you're still reading, comment 1. Because you know this feeling, the moment when someone realizes you're not going to shrink to make things easier. The next week, the chair was empty. Good. But here's the part most people don't talk about. Setting a boundary doesn't always end the situation. Sometimes, it just changes how it continues. A few days later, she knocked on my door. I opened it. She stood there, arms crossed, not aggressive, but not relaxed either. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said. I considered that. "We didn't get off on any foot," I replied calmly. "You sat in my chair." A small frown. "You're very particular," she said. I smiled slightly. "Yes, I am. There's power in not defending your standards. In not apologizing for clarity. In not softening something that doesn't need to be softened." She exhaled, a little sharper this time. "It just seemed like a small thing." "It was," I said, "until it wasn't." That's the part people often miss. It's never just the thing. Not the chair. Not the parking spot. Not the seat at the table. Not the time someone borrows without asking. It's the pattern. The assumption. The quiet testing of how much you'll allow before you say something. And if you never say something, they keep going. Weeks passed. We settled into a kind of distance. Polite nods. Brief greetings. Nothing more. And then one afternoon, I saw her again standing on the sidewalk, looking toward my porch. Not sitting, just looking. She noticed me watching, hesitated, then said, almost thoughtfully, "I didn't realize it mattered that much to you." I stepped outside. "It didn't," I said. At first, she tilted her head slightly, trying to understand, so I explained it simply. "It's not about the chair," I said. "It's about what happens when small things aren't respected." That landed. You could see it. Because at some point in life, especially after 60, you start to see patterns more clearly. You've lived through enough situations to recognize how they begin, how they grow, and how they end, and more importantly, you learn where you stand in them. "I wasn't trying to take anything," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But you were getting used to having it." Another pause. Longer this time. Honest. That's the kind of pause that matters. The kind where something actually shifts. After that, things stayed the same. But different. She never sat in my chair again. Not once. And I continued my Sunday afternoons exactly as I always had, tea in hand. Quiet street. Familiar rhythm. But with one small difference. I noticed it more. Because when you almost lose something, not through force, but through gradual erosion, you start to understand its value in a deeper way. And that's the real lesson. Not about confrontation. Not about winning. But about awareness. Because most things in life aren't taken all at once. They're taken slowly. Reasonably. Politely. 1 minute at a time. Until one day, you look up and realize something that used to be yours no longer feels that way. Unless you decide otherwise. Unless you say, calmly and clearly, "This is mine," and you mean it. Every time. So if you've ever had something small slowly turn into something bigger, something that made you pause and think, "Wait, when did this become normal?" Comment, 1. Because you understand. And once you understand, you don't let it happen twice.